I don't even know why I'm writing this. Maybe because if I don't put it into words, I'll start to believe none of it really happened. Maybe because part of me wants someone else, anyone else, to know what I saw, in case something happens to me. This all began just a week before I left for college. I was supposed to be excited, relieved even. My parents had been preparing for my departure for months, packing, downsizing, moving into a smaller house. They always said the old place was too big for just the two of them. The timing seemed perfect. New chapter for me, fresh start for them. Their new house wasn't far. An older home, single-story pale paint peeling at the edges, with a porch that sagged a little when you walked across it. I remember when they gave me the tour. The kitchen smelled faintly of bleach, the living room still echoed, and my mom tried to sound cheerful, pointing out how cozy it was. Dad made sure I knew where everything was: the circuit breaker, the crawlspace panel, the quirks of the plumbing. I distinctly remember him saying, "No basement here, just a crawlspace for utilities. That's it." He said it like it was final, absolute, so I didn't think about it again. Not until the first night they left me alone. They had gone on vacation, leaving me in charge of the house. I wasn't bothered. I figured it'd be nice to have a place to myself before moving into a cramped dorm. The first night felt normal, quiet, uneventful, until I was trying to fall asleep. That's when I heard it. A sound, faint at first, a rhythmic tapping, tap, tap, tap. At first I thought it might be pipes knocking or maybe something shifting in the walls, but it didn't stop. It was steady, deliberate, coming from directly beneath me. I sat up in bed listening. I should explain. My room was on the first floor, right above where the crawl space would be. The tapping was coming from below ground level. I got up, pressing my ear to the floor. The sound seemed to travel as if it was everywhere under the boards, not in one spot. It wasn't random like house settling, not scurrying like an animal. It was too measured. And then it stopped. Just as suddenly as it began, I convinced myself it was nothing. Just the house adjusting, or maybe my imagination playing tricks. But unease stuck to me like humidity. I didn't sleep well. The second night the tapping came back. Louder this time. Almost angry. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, every muscle tight. I told myself it's the heating system. It has to be. Except the system wasn't even running. Then came the scraping, long drawn-out drags like metal across stone, or claws on wood. My throat went dry. I didn't dare move. Every sound was clearer, closer, as if someone or something was beneath the floorboards. I wanted to believe my parents had been wrong, that maybe there was some kind of access point, maybe even a small basement, because the alternative was too terrifying. Still, I forced myself to sleep. Pretended it wasn't happening. By the third night, denial wasn't an option. The sounds escalated. Not just tapping or scraping, but dragging. Heavy, deliberate movements as though something was being hauled across the earth beneath me. At one point, I swear I heard breathing. Slow, ragged inhalations. Too human to dismiss. I sat on the bed, clutching my phone, torn between calling my parents or the police. But how do you even explain that? "Excuse me, officer, I think there's something living in the crawl space my dad swears doesn't exist." When dawn came, I felt like I'd survived a war. I called my parents, trying not to sound hysterical. Dad brushed it off. "Probably a raccoon or a stray cat. Just check the crawl space entrance." I didn't want to. Every instinct screamed at me not to. But I also didn't want him thinking I was some paranoid kid who couldn't handle being alone for a few days. So I forced myself to look. The entrance was under the porch, a wooden hatch with rusted hinges. I crawled under, heart racing, every nerve ready to see glowing eyes staring back at me. But there was nothing, just dirt. No animals, no nests, no signs of intrusion. I told Dad. He seemed satisfied. I wasn't. Later that day, while circling the house, I saw an old stack of construction materials leaning against the siding. Lumber, tarps, concrete blocks, leftovers maybe. They looked like they'd been there for years. For some reason, I started moving them. Maybe I was desperate to find something that explained the noises. What I found wasn't supposed to exist. Behind the lumber was a storm door, rusted metal, partially painted over but still intact. My chest tightened. I pulled it open. A gust of cold air wafted up, damp and sour. A staircase descended into darkness. Concrete steps, leading down. My parents were wrong. The house did have a basement. I shouldn't have gone down there. Every fiber of my being told me to close the door, seal it, forget it. But I went anyway. The steps groaned under my weight. The air was heavier the deeper I went, thick with mildew and something else, something metallic. The basement was larger than I expected. Not just a utility crawl space, but an entire room carved from stone. And it wasn't empty. Scattered across the floor were empty food containers, plastic bottles, torn sleeping bags. Someone had been living down there. That wasn't the worst part. On the far wall, etched into the wooden support beams, were markings. Hundreds of them. Scratch marks. Some looked like tally marks. Others formed crude drawings, distorted figures, animals with twisted limbs, faces carved with manic detail. And then I saw the symbol, a circle with jagged lines radiating from it, drawn over and over, gouged deep into the wood. I can't explain it, but the sight of it made my stomach lurch. It felt wrong, like something ancient and hostile staring back at me. I fled, slammed the storm door shut, my lungs burning. The first thing I did was drive into town and buy a heavy-duty padlock. I secured the door from the outside. For the first time in days, I thought maybe I could relax. I was wrong. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard it. Bang, 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 someone was pounding on the storm door. Violent, furious, rattling the hinges. I froze, unable to breathe. The pounding grew louder until I was sure the metal would give way. And then silence. I crept to the window, heart hammering. Just as I peeked out, I saw it. A figure sprinting across the backyard. Fast, too fast, vanishing into the dark. I called the police. They searched, found nothing. The basement was empty. No intruder, no evidence. My parents came home the next day, shocked at what I'd found. They swore they had no idea the basement existed. Dad kept asking if I was sure, as if I'd imagined it all. They promised to handle it. Told me to focus on school. But I can't. It's been days since I left for college, and I can't stop thinking about it. The storm door. The scratch marks. The drawings. And the figure. Whoever had been living down there, they weren't normal. They weren't just squatting. The markings weren't random. They meant something. And the sound I heard, those slow, deliberate taps, they weren't trying to get out. They were trying to get my attention. I don't know why I left. I don't know why I thought my parents would be safe just because they're not alone. The truth is I abandoned them. And deep down I know the house isn't empty. Not really. It never was. I never used to think much about the road between my town and the next one over. Just a long strip of asphalt cutting through farmland and pine woods. A place I drove almost every day without really noticing. It was the kind of road you forget while you're on it. Empty fields on one side, forest on the other. A place where you could drive for 20 minutes and only pass a single truck. I knew every curve, every broken stretch of guardrail, every sign riddled with bullet holes. But now whenever I think about it, I feel sick to my stomach, because I know what I saw there, and I know what I shouldn't have seen. It was late August, the air still heavy and humid, though the leaves on the trees were just starting to show hints of turning. I was heading to work early in the morning, coffee still burning my tongue. Windows rolled down to let in what little breeze there was. The road was empty, as usual, until I saw it. A car on the shoulder, maybe 50 yards ahead. At first I didn't think anything of it. Cars break down. People pull over. It happens. But as I got closer, I noticed there was no one inside. The windows were rolled up. The hazard lights weren't on. It just sat there, slightly crooked. The driver's side pulled closer to the ditch as if whoever had parked it hadn't cared about staying on the asphalt. I slowed down, craning my neck as I passed, empty, not a soul in sight. The car looked older, dusty, like it had been there overnight. I thought maybe someone had gone to get help, or maybe they were out of sight in the woods. But there were no tracks in the grass, no footprints, no sign of movement. Just silence. I drove on, telling myself it wasn't my problem. People abandon cars all the time. That afternoon, heading back home, the car was still there. Only this time, the driver's door was hanging wide open. My foot eased off the gas as I stared. Something about it was wrong. Too deliberate. Like whoever had been inside hadn't just left, they'd been pulled. I remember my hands gripping the wheel so tightly they hurt. I wanted to stop to look, to at least check if someone needed help. But I didn't. I drove past, my heart pounding, my mind screaming at me to just keep moving. And still I couldn't shake the image of that open door gaping like a mouth. That night, the local news mentioned a missing man. 34 years old, last seen driving the same stretch of road I took to work. The words hit me like a brick to the chest. I just knew. That was his car. I called my brother the next morning. He's a firefighter, steady, level-headed, not the kind of guy to scare easily. I told him about the car, about the missing man, about the open door. He listened, though I could tell he thought I was being dramatic. Still, when a volunteer search party was organized, he agreed to let me come along. There must have been 50 of us that Saturday morning, combing through the woods near the highway. Rows of people spaced apart, walking slowly, eyes scanning for anything unusual. The woods there are thick, tangled with underbrush and fallen trees, the kind of place where you can't see more than 30 feet ahead. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that empty car parked in the trees somehow, watching us. After an hour or so, my brother and I found it. A shack half buried under vines and dirt, tucked into a hollow just beyond the ditch. It didn't look like a hunter's blind or an old shed. It looked wrong, like something that wasn't supposed to be there. The door was little more than plywood, hanging crooked on rusted hinges. We exchanged a look, then pushed it open. The smell hit first. Rot mold, something metallic under it all. Inside, the shack was small, maybe 10 by 10 feet. The floor, nothing but packed earth. Trash littered the corners, wrappers, bottles, shredded blankets. Someone had been living there or hiding there, and on the far wall a single bullet hole punched clean through the wood, the splintered edges dark with what might have been old blood. We called it in, of course. Within minutes, deputies and troopers were swarming the place, yellow tape fluttering in the breeze. But something was off. Their faces were tight, their voices clipped like they'd seen too much too fast, and then just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. They ordered the volunteers back to their cars. Told us the search was done for the day. Said they'd handle it, but they didn't handle it. Or if they did, it wasn't in the way they should have. Because when I went back 2 days later, the shack was gone. Not just boarded up. Not just taped off, gone as if it had never existed. I walked the same trail, found the same hollow, but all that was left was dirt and weeds. No plywood, no bullet hole, no sign anyone had ever been there. I stood there for hours, convinced I'd lost my mind. I tried to tell my brother, but he only gave me this strange look, half pity, half fear, and told me to drop it. The police wouldn't answer my calls. The missing man's case went cold. And the car? It vanished from the roadside a week later, towed away in the middle of the night, no announcement, no explanation. I wish I could tell you that was the end of it, that I let it go, chalked it up to paranoia, but I can't, because something followed me home that day. Not physically, maybe, but in my head. I see that open car door every time I close my eyes. I hear the creak of that shack door swinging on its hinges. I feel the weight of silence in those woods, pressing down like a warning. Sometimes late at night I wake to the sound of gravel crunching outside my window. Like tires rolling slow, deliberate, stopping just beyond sight. I rush to look, but the street is always empty. Sometimes I dream I'm back on that road. The field's endless, the woods too dark. And the car is there again. Always there, waiting for me with its door wide open. It's been years now, but every August, when the air turns heavy and the leaves begin to shift, I feel it again. The pull of that place, the sense that something unfinished is still lingering, watching. I know what I saw. I know what was there. The shack was real. Or maybe I was. One of us had to vanish, and I still don't know which it was. I used to love camping alone. It sounds strange when I say it out loud now after everything that happened. But back then, solitude was something I craved. I worked a dull job in town, lived in a small rented apartment, and spent my days surrounded by noise, questions, and other people's problems. Going into the woods alone at the end of summer was my way of pressing pause, my way of breathing. Out there, away from all the constant chatter of the world, it was just me, the trees, and the silence. Or at least that's what I thought. It was late August, just before September rolled in with its shorter days. I'd picked out a clearing on the map, far from any official campsite. No toilets, no gravel pads for RVs, no families dragging coolers and screaming kids. Just forest, untouched, perfect. I packed light. Tent, food, water filter, a book, a small switchblade I always carried more out of habit than need. My girlfriend hated the idea of me going alone, said it wasn't safe. I laughed it off. Safe from what? Deer, chipmunks. The hike-in took a couple hours. The deeper I went, the quieter everything became, like even the birds didn't want to follow me there. By the time I reached the clearing, I was sweating, sore, but satisfied. The place looked like it had been waiting for me. Flat ground, enough space for a fire, a wide open patch of sky above the tree line. I pitched my tent, gathered wood, and spent that first night in the kind of peace I thought only existed in memory. The stars above me felt endless. The second day, I hiked to a river a mile or two away, tried my luck with fishing. I wasn't good at it, but I managed to catch a trout, big enough to keep. I was proud of myself, almost childishly so. I packed it into my cooler, imagining roasting it over the fire that night. The sun, though, betrayed me. I'd misjudged the time, and by the time I started back, shadows were already stretching across the woods. Within half an hour, I was walking in near darkness. That's when I saw the light. A faint glow, swaying rhythmically through the trees like a lantern or flashlight. At first, I felt relief. Another camper, maybe. Someone else making their way back. I called out, raising my voice so it wouldn't seem threatening.
Hey, you camping out here too?
The light froze. For a moment, it hung in the dark like a star suspended between the trees. And then it vanished. Snuffed out as if it had never existed. The silence that followed pressed against my ears until I could hear my own pulse. Seconds later, the crashing started. Not toward me, not away, but off to the side, parallel to where I stood. Something or someone running full speed through the underbrush. The sound was violent, branches breaking, leaves tearing. My heart stuttered in my chest. I told myself it was another camper spooked by my voice. That was the logical explanation. But logic felt thin and fragile as I stood there in the dark, headlamp beam cutting through trees that suddenly looked too tall, too close. I hurried back to camp, throat dry, every step faster than the last. By the time I zipped into my tent, I could barely swallow the packed food I forced down instead of cooking the fish. Sleep should have claimed me quickly. I was exhausted, but my body wouldn't allow it. Every snap of a twig outside, every shift of wind in the branches made me jolt awake again. At some point, I must have drifted off, because when I opened my eyes, it was deep night. The moon lit the clearing in pale silver, enough that I could see without my lamp. I needed to piss. Reluctantly, I unzipped the tent, head poking through, and froze. There was a figure, standing not 20 feet away, perfectly still, facing my tent. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a deer. It was a man. A man standing in silence as though he'd been waiting for me to look. I couldn't make out his features, only the outline of his body against the trees. My breath caught in my throat. The world shrank to the sound of my zipper still hanging half open, my heart pounding in my ears. He didn't move, not a twitch, just stood there watching. I reached for the switchblade I kept by the entrance of my tent, my fingers trembling. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to sound stronger than I felt. The response was immediate. The man sprinted toward me. There was no buildup, no hesitation. Just stillness to full sprint in a heartbeat. His feet pounded the dirt, his silhouette growing larger, and then he was on me, crashing into my body before I could even raise the blade. His scream, God, that scream still rattles in my bones. It wasn't human. Not fully. Too high-pitched, shrill, animalistic, like tearing metal blended with laughter. He clawed at my face, not punching, not grappling, clawing. His nails ripped skin, dragged across my cheeks, my forehead, my neck. I fought back blindly, slashing with the blade. It connected once, cutting his hand. The scream turned into something worse. Rage and pain fused into a sound I'd never want to hear again. He staggered back, clutching his bleeding hand, then bolted into the woods. His shrieks echoed between the trees long after his body vanished into darkness. I sat there for hours, trembling, bleeding, my knife slick with something that wasn't entirely mine. Every sound made me flinch. Every whisper of wind felt like his breath returning. I considered running for my car right then, but the forest was a black wall of thorns and trunks. If I left, I wouldn't make it out alive, so I stayed, knife in hand, waiting. When dawn came, I was still awake. My face throbbed with scratches, my clothes stiff with dried blood. The woods looked different in daylight, safer, almost peaceful. I packed up my gear with shaking hands and left. The walk back to the car was torture. Every step I expected to hear him again, every turn I expected to see his silhouette. But I made it. I didn't call the police. What would I say? That a man had attacked me in the woods with claws and a scream that wasn't human? They'd laugh. Or worse, they'd investigate and find nothing, and I'd be left alone with the knowledge that he was still out there. It's been a year now. My face has healed, though the scars are faint reminders of that night. I don't camp anymore. I don't hike. Some days I don't even leave my apartment once the sun goes down. I tell myself he was just a man, deranged, high on something, maybe living wild in the woods. That's what my rational brain says, but my dreams disagree. In my dreams, he stands at the edge of my bed the same way he stood in that clearing, motionless, waiting. Sometimes the light of the moon flickers and I see his hand, still cut, still bleeding, reaching for me. And sometimes, just before I wake in a sweat, I hear that scream again, far off, like it's coming from the woods outside my window. And the worst part? Sometimes I'm not dreaming when I hear it.